Welcome to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, where will cycling's biggest stars be racing in 2020? We're going to take a look at the GC Riders Grand Tour calendars. We've also got the US National Cyclocross Championships and Mathieu van der Poel not winning a cyclocross race. Unbelievable scenes. And in fact, we will start with just that. On Saturday, the latest round of the DVV Trophy took place in Rosa, and it saw the return to competition of Van der Poel, who recently took himself off on a warm weather training camp in Spain, where he was getting some longer rides in. Van der Poel, Elie and Toon Aert soon found themselves clear of the rest, and it was they who would fill all three podium spots in the end, but perhaps not in the order that you might expect. Aerts displayed some impressive skills in the mud and eventually finished a full minute and a half ahead of Isabit, which meant that Van der Poel had to settle for third place on the day. The world champion took to social media afterwards to say, "You can't win them all," something I think we can all empathise with. Incidentally, Toon Aert was also the winner the last time that Mathieu van der Poel took part in a cyclocross race and failed to win. That was at the Koppenberg Cross back in November of 2018, which was 408 days ago. And it is Aerts that has now put a stop to Van der Poel's incredible winning streak of 35 consecutive cyclocross race wins. And as the old saying goes, nobody beats Toon Aerts 36 times in a row. Anyway, there can only be one GCN Rider of the Week this week, and it has to be Toon Aert. Well done to you, Toon. In the women's event that day, Kaylin Del Carmen Alvarado showed everybody else how it was done. She was already close to 20 seconds clear at the end of just the first lap, and nobody would be able to catch her. She finished ahead of Anne-Marie Vorst and European champion Yara Castelline. Now, before 2 weeks ago at the Kortrijk round of the DVV Trophy, there had never been an all-Dutch podium, but now it's happened twice in a row. Just off the podium though was Evie Richards of the UK, who is making her first appearance this season at a top-level cyclocross in Europe. Jeremy in fact interviewed her at length recently for our cyclocross podcast, and you can find a link to that in the description which is just below this video. Right, we may be in the midst of winter and the cyclocross season, but most road pros are well underway with their training for next year, and many of them have revealed their main season goals. So we thought we'd take a look at which Grand Tours the GC contenders will compete in 2020. And we shall start with current Tour de France champion Egan Bernal. The 22-year-old was due to compete at this year's Giro d'Italia before a broken collarbone in training put paid to his first big goal of the year. The rest, though, as they say, is history. He went on to win the Tour de Suisse, his first race back, and of course the Tour de France in July too. Next year, however, he has publicly stated that he would like to attempt the Giro Tour double. In an interview with Spanish newspaper AS, he said that his race programme was still to be finalised with his team Ineos, but wouldn't that be great to see? If he does do it, he'll face competition from two-time former winner Vincenzo Nibali. This year, the Italian finished as runner-up at the Giro and then went on to the Tour, where he targeted stage wins. Next year, he'll be riding for Trek Segafredo and has already confirmed that he'll compete at the Giro, but will then miss the Tour to focus on the Olympic Games and World Championships. Both of those take place on hilly circuits next year. He may also do the Vuelta, he said too. That focus though means that Richie Porte and Bauke Mollema will likely be Trek Segafredo's main general classification threats at the Tour de France. Now, another man set to miss the Tour for the first time in 8 years is Romain Bardet. The Frenchman was below par there this year, despite coming out of it with the King of the Mountains polka dot jersey. And next year, he has decided to focus on the Giro, the Olympics, the Vuelta, and Liège-Bastogne-Liège. It's going to be interesting to see how he does in Italy though, isn't it? The hilly Olympic course though has really complicated things for the Grand Tour GC riders. Jakob Fuglsang has stated that he'll prioritise that race over any other next year. So he'll race the Giro to go for GC and then ride in support of Miguel Angel Lopez at the Tour de France. And surprisingly, that'll be the Colombian's first outing at the biggest Grand Tour of them all. Alejandro Valverde's main aim will also be the Olympic Games road race, although we're as yet uncertain as to which Grand Tour he'll do before it. It doesn't mean though that there won't be any big name riders targeting the Tour de France next year though, far from it in fact. Mikel Landa will be for one. His team, Bahrain McLaren, have already told him that he'll go there as the team's sole GC captain, so no more #FreeLanda needed there. Chris Froome has also stated that his main motivation to return to full health and full fitness is to go for a record equalling 5th Tour de France win. We don't, and probably even he doesn't, know if it's feasible just yet, but we should get an insight when he returns to racing at at some point next year. Frenchman Thibaut Pinot of Groupama FDJ has also confirmed his participation at the Tour de France next year. He was flying this year, wasn't he, before having to quit the race in tears after suffering a knee injury in that final week. The course does look tailor-made for him in 2020, so could we see the first French Tour victory in decades? We shall wait and see. Now, although it hasn't been confirmed just yet, you would imagine that also Nairo Quintana will be at the Tour de France, seeing as he'll be racing there for French squad Arkea Samsic. They'll surely be looking for him to be back to the Quintana of old and produce a good general classification result. It also looks as though Emmanuel Buchmann and Enric Mas will be there for the GC at the Tour de France for their respective teams, Bora Hansgrohe and Movistar. As to the other hitters from Team Ineos, well, Geraint Thomas and Richard Carapaz, we're not exactly sure yet. Thomas hinted in late September that he'd be open to skipping the Tour to focus on the Giro d'Italia, whilst Carapaz, the defending Giro champion, has not given us any indication as to which of the Grand Tours he'll ride next year. And what about Jumbo-Visma? They have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to GC contenders next year, with Tom Dumoulin added to the roster that already contains Primoz Roglic, Steven Kruijswijk and George Bennett. However, we are still in the dark about how they're going to divide those leaders between next season's biggest races. Nice position to be in, but I, for one, would not want to be that team manager trying to please all those leaders. Speaking of which, in last week's poll here on the GCN Racing News Show, we asked you if Jumbo-Visma will be able to successfully combine both sprints and GC ambitions at next year's Tour, and 65% of those who voted in the GCN app said yes, they would, which is interesting. We're also still in the dark at the moment as to the aims of Esteban Chaves and Adam and Simon Yates of Mitchelton Scott for next year, but hopefully we'll get news on that very soon. UAE Team Emirates DS Alan Piper hinted in November that Tadej Pogačar may make his debut at the Tour de France next year off the back of his incredible performance at this year's Vuelta, but also stated they are very aware of how young he still is, just 21. However, more recently, Pogačar has been slated as doing the Giro d'Italia in 2020. Either way, it's going to be great to see what he can do. What an exciting prospect he is. So, those are the GC riders, but what about other notable names? Well, Peter Sagan will compete at the Giro for the first time next year. You'd imagine that he will also be competing at the Tour de France for Bora Hansgrohe. And Mathieu van der Poel will be making his debut at a number of high-profile races next season, just as long as his team, Corendon Circus, get a wildcard invitation. They include Strada Bianca, Tirreno Adriatico, Milano-San Remo and Paris-Roubaix. He will also return to the Tour of Flanders, although isn't sure yet whether he'll go back to defend his Amstel Gold title. Oh, and how can I forget Julian Alaphilippe? What a fantastic season he had in 2019. I actually couldn't decide whether to categorise him as a GC contender or not, and I'm not sure whether he does know either. He's going to make his debut, though, at the Tour of Flanders in April of next year, and he's going to swap out Tirreno for Paris-Nice as preparation. You can pretty much guarantee as well that he'll be back at the Tour de France too, but it remains to be seen whether he'll target the GC or just stage wins. I don't know about you, but I can't wait for next season to start already. Right, moving over to the US National Cyclocross Championships in Lakewood, Washington now, and it wasn't only Mathieu van der Poel whose winning streak came to an end. Katie Compton sat on the start line of the race as the woman who'd won it for the previous 15 years in a row. But this year, finally, that incredible winning streak came to an end. The woman that broke that streak was Clara Honsinger of Team S&M. She and Rebecca Faringer had pulled clear of Compton reasonably early in the race, with Honsinger eventually proving to be the strongest and taking her first title. Compton would in the end have to settle for third, but as you would expect, she was very gracious in defeat. She is the only rider, male or female, who's won an elite-level National Cyclocross Championships 15 years in a row. In fact, including track, cyclocross and road national elite-level titles in all countries ever, the only rider who has a national title more times consecutively than Compton was another American rider called Frank Kramer. He won the USA National Track Sprint titles 16 times in a row, starting in 1901. In the men's elite event, we had the youngest winner since 1982. Back then, it was Roy Nickman who took the Stars and Stripes jersey at the absurdly young age of just 17. This year, it was 21-year-old Gage Hecht of Donnelly Avelo. Hecht had taken the lead early in the race and was pushing the limits, almost coming to grief at the bottom of this descent on lap 2. Kerry Werner, the unlucky rider to get caught up in the course marking, is just behind him. However, nothing would stop Hecht. He crossed the line 17 seconds ahead of Curtis White, with last year's champion Stephen Hyde having to settle for third on the day. I'd like to say again thanks to all of you who tuned into our live coverage of the event, and if you missed it, you can catch it as live right here on GCN Racing. Okay, we are going to head very briefly back to Europe now, and Van der Poel was back to his winning ways at the Dreven Cross yesterday. That didn't take too long, did it? He now has an impressive winning streak of 1. He beat Tom Pidcock into second and Quinten Hermans into third. In the women's event there, it was Anne-Marie Vorst who won by over a minute from Lucinda Brandt. Right, before we move on, let me tell you what we've got coming up on the channel over the next week. So on Saturday, we have the next round of the Reykjavik series, which comes from St Nicholas. That is live worldwide, except for Belgium and the Netherlands. And then on Sunday, we have got the next round of the UCI World Cyclocross Cup from Namur, but I'm afraid we've only got that live in selected countries within Europe. Shortly, I'm going to be going through some of the 2020 World Tour team kits, but first, it's time for something a bit different, the Tour of the Andes. This event is described by the organisers as 9 days of ultra-cycling and intense bikepacking at the end of the world, entering the Andes covering a total of 1,460 kilometres with 23,000 metres of accumulated ascent and finishing on the route of the mythical snail slope in Portillo. Now, it might have been 9 days for some, but for the winners of the dupla category, it was less than 5. Andres Tagle and Rodrigo Canuto Errázuriz of Chile took just 4 days and 14 hours to complete the event, which is more than 300 kilometres per day. And actually, the winner of the solo event, Rodrigo Rojo, wasn't that far behind. He completed the distance in 5 days and 11 hours, which meant he was 4 hours clear of his closest rival, Christian Munoz. Ashley Kerlock of the USA won the women's solo category in an impressive time of 6 days and 2 hours. This, I think, is an event that you can describe as epic without fear of overusing the word. Right, we've had lots of new kits launched over the last week since the Racing News Show, starting with this from Bahrain McLaren, which we showed you on last week's GCN show, reminiscent a little bit of the old Domina Bacanza kit from many years ago. AG2R have stuck with brown shorts. Again, not much change there versus this year. It's either a love it or hate it one, that always has been. Mainly hate, I'd have thought, but still. Lotus Soudal have added an extra colour to this year's predominantly red and white jersey with black across the shoulders. I do like that one, I think it's very smart indeed. The Israel Cycling Academy have rebranded as Israel Startup Foundation. This is what the likes of Dan Martin and Andre Greipel will be wearing next season. Although one man who is going to have to wait a little longer to wear it is Rory Sutherland. The veteran Australian had an accident at the team get-together, coming off an electric scooter and fracturing his femur, which sounds very painful indeed. In an update on Instagram, Sutherland said that he will return home soon and described it as just another chapter in life. We hope you get well soon, Rory. And finally, here is the new Deceuninck Quickstep outfit. More white than this year's kit for the Wolf Pack, and if you look closely, you can actually see a wolf design in the kit. Although, as Mihai Kazuka pointed out on Twitter, it's also got a bit of a Castorama feel about it. We will be going through all of the 2020 team kits on a GCN show coming in January, and you will be able to vote for them hot or not on the GCN app, so keep your eye out for that soon. Now, the route for next year's Tirreno Adriatico was unveiled last week. The main change being that it no longer opens with a team time trial. Instead, it will start at the road stage for the first time since 2010. The deciding stage, though, could well be the mountaintop finish up Sassotetto, a stage that was won by Mikel Landa in 2018. Richie Porte, the king of Willunga Hill, has confirmed his participation at the Tour Down Under again, along with teammate and road world champion Mads Pedersen. Porte will be hoping to prevent Daryl Impey from taking a third successive overall title Down Under. And finally, Lars Boehm has announced his retirement from professional road cycling. The 33-year-old had 24 career victories, including the cobbled stage of the Tour de France in 2014. He is yet another rider who will switch his attention to the dirt, where he'll compete in gravel, beach and mountain bike races. Right, that is all for this week's GCN Racing News Show. We'll be back next week with all the action from this coming weekend's cyclocross. In the meantime, if you can't get enough of your racing, we've got one of a different kind right now. The latest GCN Presenter Challenge. Slightly annoyingly, the race was to a pub and I wasn't even invited. Shocking. Now you can find it down here.